It is the mark of our undying tradition to invoke the Almighty at the beginning of an important event. I now request Anusha Jain and team to lead us in prayer.
Pashankushadhara Mushikavahana Sarpalankritane Gajanana Pashankushadhara Mushikavahana Sarpalankritane Gajanana Adipujita Neenu Vedavandita Neenu Adipujita Neenu Vedavandita Neenu Modaka Priya Neenu Ganadipa Sharanu Ninage Sharanu Vinayaka Sharanu Ninage Sharanu.
Nothing could be more reassuring and heartwarming than affectionate words of salutation. I request Professor M.S. Mustaq, the Chairman, Department of Applied Zoology, to cordially welcome the gathering.
A very warm good morning to one and all. Respected dignitaries on the dais and off the dais. Our esteemed guest of honor, today's speaker, Professor E.M. George Van Dream, University of Bern, Switzerland, and presidents of today's program, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Mangalore University. Because of his busy schedule and he's traveling today, so he could not make up, so he had sent the message for us that will be playing after some time. Dr. Vinay Rajat, Chairman, Department of Sociology, Dr. Somanna, Chairman, Department of Kannada, and Dr. Parinitha, Chairman, Department of English, esteemed colleagues, research scholars, beloved participants, dear students, supporting staff member, friends from media, and invitees. I extend a very warm and cordial welcome to one and all present here. I am greatly honored to welcome our distinguished gathering for the International Special Lecture organized by Department of Applied Zoology, Kannada, Sociology and English. As a convener of this program, it is my proud privilege to welcome our speaker, Professor E.M. George Van Dream, Professor Emeritus at the University of Bern and visiting professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati, and Isabel Dalhousie Fellow at the Institute of Advanced Studies of University of Edinburgh. He has written several grammars of previously undescribed language of Himalayas, like Limbu, Dumi, Bumthang, Dzongkha. In Bhutan, he conducted linguistic survey of kingdom under auspices of Royal Government of Bhutan, collecting first linguistic data on 3 languages previously unknown to science. That is Lokku, Gontuk, Black Mountain, Mompa. In addition to his language descriptions, he published the 2-volume handbook Language of Himalayas and Comprehensive History of Tea entitled Tale of Tea. This book will be coming to our library shortly. His interdisciplinary collaboration with population genetist and archaeologist resulted in the monograph Ethno-Linguistic Prehistory and numerous writing on the population prehistory of Asia. It is our pleasure to have you in Mangalore University, sir. I wholeheartedly welcome you, sir. I request Professor Somanna to florally welcome Dr. George. I also like to welcome Professor Vinay Rajat, Chairman, Department of Sociology. I request Professor Bhaskar Shane to florally welcome him. I also welcome Professor Parinitha, Chairman, Department of English. I request Govindaraju to give the flowery welcome to him. Go ahead. I also welcome Professor Somanna, Chairman, Department of Kannada. I request Dr. Sabita to to hand over the floral welcome as token of love. I welcome different Professor Kishori Nayak, Department ex head Department of English, and various professors from the various department and head of the department from the different and also I have some friends from the different places like Yenapaya. I really welcome you all, and faculty members, official of the university, non-teaching staff members, and also welcome my colleagues Shyam Prasad and Professor Bhaskar Shane, and research scholars, students, media friends and invitees. Due to unavoidable circumstances, busy schedule, I has told you our Honorable Vice Chancellor has to travel short, so he could not attend the meeting. So he conveyed message, we'll be playing it later. So this is the current topic everyone debates nowadays, what we propose today. So Professor is a renowned person to address this topic. Being we are living in Karavali, we don't know by surprise, but he can read the Kannada. He is from Switzerland and Bhutan, but he knows many languages of our Dakshina Kannada. So he is with us to pour us lots of knowledge on the provenance of coastal Karnataka languages and connect to Indo-European language and Indo-Iranian, Indo-Aryan and Konkani and Tulu, etc. So take this opportunity. I welcome you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. A warm welcome to you too. I request Mr. Jason to welcome our chairman florally. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader. Quoting John Quincy Adams, we are pleased to have the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Mangalore University, Professor P. Subramania Edapadithaya, as the presider of this program. I welcome him in his absence. Now, let us witness the presidential remarks by Sir through a video message.
Very good morning to all of you. Greetings from Mangalore University. At the very outset, let me cordially welcome you all to this wonderful session. Mangalore University, along with the departments of Applied Zoology, Sociology, Kannada and English, has organized this international special lecture by a world-renowned linguist, Professor M. Dr. George Van Driem. It's a pleasure to have him with us at Mangalore University. I am sure this session will be an inspiring one for the ethno-linguistic enthusiasts, students, and the community in general. In his abstract, he speaks about the complexity in the linguistic mosaic of the Karavali region and the discovery of the Indo-European language family, the current state of the scientific knowledge with regard to the origins and the spread of Indo-European on the basis of the cumulative evidence of historical comparative linguistics, population genetics, and material culture. I am sure the sessions will be thought-provoking to young and old minds attending the lecture. It gives us immense satisfaction about such an interdisciplinary knowledge transfer program happening at our university. Here we are again to witness it at an international level. An interdisciplinary research with the linguistics and genetics would certainly brighten up the progressive outlook of the coastal communities and will set an example to others rich in culture and history. I am sure the speaker would address the need and significance of such interdisciplinary research. We look forward to this special lecture and its success. My best wishes to all the participants and particularly to Professor George. Let me commend the efforts of Dr. M.S. Mustak, Convener and Chairman, Department of Applied Zoology, Dr. Vinayat Rajat D, Chairman, Department of Sociology, Dr. Somanna, Chairman, Department of Canada, Dr. Parinitha Madam, Chairman, Department of English, and the entire team. Thank you very much for your time and opportunity. Jai Hind, Jai Karnataka.
Behind every great achievement is a dreamer of great dreams. Quoting Robert K. Greenleaf, we have with us today a distinguished linguist, Professor George van Preum, Emeritus Professor, University of Bern, Switzerland. He is a visiting professor at the Indian Institute of Technology in Guwahati and Isabel Dalhousie Fellow at the Institute of Advanced Studies of the University of Edinburgh. I request the dignitaries to felicitate Sir on this occasion. Success is delivered only to the deserving. Congratulations on your deserved success, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a time for the commencement of the most anticipated events of today. The first session of the day is going to be on the provenance of the coastal Karnataka languages and the greater Dravidian questions. I now request the dignitaries to kindly vacate the stage and occupy the front seats in the audience. The session will be commencing shortly.
Namaste, namaskar, friends, students, colleagues. Am I too loud? No. Am I too soft? Too soft? Oh, that's not in my hands actually. Okay. I'm going to present 3 talks today, and it is about the provenance of the coastal Karnataka languages. All 3 talks are about that. The first and the third talk are shorter, I believe, than the second talk. And the first talk will address the greater Dravidian question. Or should I try like this? This is better? This is better. So when I go away from here, it's better. Okay. So here you see, of course, an image, a sculpture from the Harappan civilization, and this is central or emblematic to the question of Dravidian historical identity, because the ideas that I'm going to set forward today, some of them will be familiar to you because this is the history of scholarship on Dravidian linguistics and the provenance, the origins of the Dravidian language communities. In scholarship. Let me see. Here we have Francis White Ellis, and he was the first to recognize that the Dravidian languages were a separate language family. What is a language family? Many of you study zoology, so you know about families and phyla and genera in zoology, and it works the same way in linguistics. And a family, in linguistic terms, is when you see that a group of languages are demonstrably related, and that you can show that they are related, and that as far back as you can go in time to see that they are related. And when this person, Francis White Ellis, looked at the languages, and of course he was not alone, there were people who looked at the languages before him, he made this bold statement that the Dravidian languages are separate, meaning phylogenetically separate, that they represent a separate language family from the Indo-European languages. This is an interesting statement because, of course, the first people who came to the Indian coast from Europe in 1498, they noticed Sanskrit, because all of the languages have lots of loans from Sanskrit. And Sanskrit is, of course, an Indo-European language. So it took people a while to figure out that the languages, Telugu, Tamil, Kannarese is, of course, Kannada, Malayalam, Tulu, Kodugu, and Malto, that they form a distinct language family. Here is Vasco da Gama, and this is a page from his Roteiro da Primeira Viagem a India, which is his travel log to India. It's a very interesting thing to read. It's written in Portuguese, handwritten Portuguese, and it's kept in the library in Oporto in Portugal. And at the end, you see a word list, and it is maybe difficult for you to read, certainly at that distance, but it is the first Malayalam Portuguese word list. So already in 1498, of course it says 1497 to 1499 because it is the whole itinerary of the voyage from Europe to Calicut or Kozhikode, and then back to Lisbon. And you see the first Western source. The first grammar, in the sense of a linguistic description of Malayalam in linguistic terms in a Western language, is this one by Herman Gundert from 1851. And of course Malayalam is one of the large Dravidian languages with 50 million speakers, and its own script, a beautiful script, and a literature which dates back from the 12th century. The Bhasa Kautilya and epigraphy from the 9th century. This is extremely old, when you know that the oldest works in English are, Beowulf and the history, the church history of England, Historia Ecclesiastica Gentis Anglorum, written in Latin by Beda Venerabilis and then translated into English by King Alfred. It's not as old as this. And of course, other Dravidian languages have even older literary traditions. This is the first description of Tamil. It says Arte da Língua Malabar in Português. So the art or the grammar of the Malabar language in Portuguese. And of course you think Malabar is the west coast, but of course this is confusing because Coromandel is then the other coast, but it is a grammar of Tamil, and it was written by the Jesuit Enrique Enriquez, and it is only available, as far as I know, in handwritten copy and scanned copy. I don't know if there is a printed version published, but you can consult these things in the Biblioteca Nacional in Portugal, in both Lisbon and in Oporto. Tamil has 66 million speakers. It's written in this beautiful Ashokan Southern Brahmi script, and it was first developed by Jain monks, or used by Jain monks in the 5th and 2nd century BC. So it's extremely old when you compare it with, for example, with English. And Tamil epigraphy already dates from the 3rd century BC, and Tamil literary works date from the 1st century AD, and the literary language codified in its modern literary form, not the colloquial form, but not the colloquial spoken form, but the literary standard was already codified in the 14th century AD. So this is extremely old in terms of a literary tradition. Telugu. 74 million speakers, perhaps the most spoken in terms of number of speakers, the most spoken Dravidian language, and a very large area. And of course you all know it looks like Kannada script, but then they don't have the beautiful top. It has this sort of checked, and it's very close to the Kannada script. But also this is a very old literary tradition dating from the 11th century AD. So even this has a literary tradition as old as English, and the Tamil, of course, has a much older literary tradition. But Telugu has an even older epigraphic tradition because of the script being used, the script originally being used in Chalukya dynasty inscriptions. So these four languages are, four, I didn't mention another one, very important I think. Kannada, 35 million speakers, and of course we all know about the early works of Nripatunga, the Kaviraj Marga, written in the 9th century AD, and also the script deriving from the same 6th century Chalukya dynasty inscriptions, and the epigraphy being therefore extremely old. This is much older than English. Tamil is much older than English, and these are four really large languages. When you compare them with most of the European languages other than English, in terms of number of speakers, these are extremely large languages, large language communities, and they are four of the Dravidian languages. But, as we know, there are other Dravidian languages. For example, here in Mangalore, we all know Tulu. We all know that this is a very important language, and Tulu is just one of 19. Some people are now claiming 20 or more, because when do you say something as a dialect and a separate language? So there are 19 established Dravidian languages identified, but perhaps more when we look into the dialect diversity. And we have over 300 million speakers of Dravidian languages. Therefore, this language family, Dravidian, is one of the most important language families on our planet, because in terms of the sheer number of speakers, it is an extremely important language family. In terms of the antiquity of the literary and epigraphic traditions, the Dravidian language family is an extremely important linguistic fiber. So it is extremely worthy of study, and of course, here, this map shows other groups, Kolami, Gondi, Parji, Kurukh. Kurukh is shown here, but there are Kurukh speakers all the way up here. I have a friend, Karan. He's always walking around Thimphu in Bhutanese dress, and he's a Bhutanese citizen, and he comes on Bhutanese television. But he looks Kurukh, and he is Kurukh, and he speaks Kurukh, and he is in Bhutan. So in this area, even here, this shows only larger communities, but you have Kurukh and Malto spoken throughout the eastern Himalayas, in the foothills, and even up integrated into Nepali and Bhutanese society. And then here in what is Balochistan, Pakistan, this part of Pakistan, we have Brahui. So we have all of these different languages, and we have this remarkable distribution. Why is this distribution remarkable? Because of course we all think of the four big languages, and we think of South India and this part of Sri Lanka. However, we have these northern Dravidian languages, and we have Brahui all the way up in Pakistan, even in Afghanistan, neighboring parts of Afghanistan. So this shows you the very huge geographical extent across the entire subcontinent of Dravidian. Here is Robert Caldwell, and he wrote in 1856 a comparative grammar of the Dravidian languages. He is also responsible for coining the term Dravidian and getting it accepted and used in the scientific literature. So he talked about the Dravidian language. Here you can read this portion where about a hypercorrect R. We're not even sure if that R is etymologically correct. We will mention Amino later in the talk, who worked on this topic. But he lived at this time, and he is responsible for doing the first comparative grammar. In fact, if you take the title, A Comparative Grammar of Dravidian Languages, that title gets repeated because he's the first to write comparative grammar of Dravidian languages, but not the last. So, what is comparative linguistics? We'll talk about that in the second talk. But he applied this method of comparative linguistics, this methodology, and he looked at the languages and reconstructed an older state of the language, the ancestral Proto-Dravidian, It was a first attempt at reconstructing Proto-Dravidian. And then another thing that he did in the same book is he launched this theory that is extremely well known about Dravidian being related to the language in the Behistun inscription. That means one language in the Behistun inscription. So he already launched this idea at that time. He felt that from what we could decipher from the Behistun inscription, that this language was related to the oldest form of Dravidian that he was able to reconstruct, and he thought this already in 1856. Here is the Behistun inscription, and here it's in cuneiform writing. You can see the cuneiform writing, and here you see the size of a hand. So this idea is old. It's not a new idea. It's an old idea, it's an old hypothesis, but people have examined the hypothesis and examined the evidence in support and, of course, opposing these hypotheses since 1856. Let's look at this inscription. This is the inscription, and the inscription begins with, "I am Darius, the great king, the king of kings, the king of Persia, the king of countries," a modest man. He was the king of Persia, and the inscription at Behistun is written in Elamite, but it is also written in 2 other languages. And look at the size of the inscription. Can you imagine how large that is? It's written on the side of a mountain. Here you see people on the lower right-hand corner, people standing just at the base of this inscription. And here is the mountain, and here is the inscription, and they're standing here on one of the ledges of the inscription. So the inscription is absolutely huge, and it was first deciphered in 1847 by this man, Henry Creswick Rawlinson. And it was written, we know it was written between Darius' accession to the throne and his death in 486. So between this period, the end of the 6th, beginning of the 5th century BC, and it is written in 3 languages. Why these 3 languages? It's written in Old Persian because, of course, Darius is the king of Persia, and this is the Persian Empire. So it is written in Old Persian. That makes sense. But why is it written in Babylonian and also in Elamite? Babylonian is also Akkadian, also Assyrian, also Assyro-Babylonian. You hear in the literature all these terms, it's the same language. But Babylonian was the language of civilization in the Near East at this time. Before, of course, it was Sumerian, then Akkadian or Babylonian. So we have this language, which is the language of civilization in the Near East. Why Elamite? Elamite was also a language of civilization in the Near East, and I will show you where it was the language of civilization. And the Persians were migrants. They came to Iran. They settled in Iran, and when they settled in Iran, there were people living in Iran before them, and people with a trade network across the Iranian plateau, and these people were Elamites. And the Elamites could read and write, and the Persians, who were migrants who came, could not read and write. So even the Persian rulers used the Elamites to write for them as scribes and clerics. So the writing was done by the Elamites because they already had a literary tradition that was centuries old. Here's the Persian Empire. This is the extent of the Persian Empire. You may not be able to read it, but this is the extent of the Persian Achaemenid Empire around 5000 BC. So you see the extent of this empire all the way to this part of Libya, this part of Thrace, and all the way to the Indus Valley at the extreme. And this, of course, is when the Persians came, they replaced many other groups. And they, in many areas, they did not replace these groups, they assimilated them, or they ruled over them without assimilating them. So they ultimately established themselves in Iran, here. But this is 500 BC. And here you see the ruins of Persepolis. These are the ruins of the capital city of Persepolis. And what do the Persians have to do with the Elamite speakers? Actually nothing at all. So we have three languages. We have Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian in this inscription. That's how they were able to decipher Elamite, because they understood, of course, what was written in Akkadian or Babylonian. Then they could figure out the Old Persian, and then they could figure out what was written in Elamite. And that's when they said this language is closely related, or Caldwell said it is closely related to the oldest form of Dravidian. This is a map of Iran, and I want to show you this map. This dot, of course, is Tehran, just to the current capital, just to show you. This is Persepolis, the capital of the Persian Empire. This here, this dot here, is Behistun. This is where the inscription is found. And these mountains, this mountain range is known as the Zagros Mountains. So Zagroshian, the Zagroshian Mountains, or the Zagros. And this dot here, that is the capital of Elam, Susa. It is now located in Iran, but here you had Sumer, the Sumerians, and then later you have the Akkadians, Babylonians. But this area here, this part, which overlaps part of modern Iraq and this whole area of Iran, this is where the Elamites lived, their homeland. But they were not restricted to their homeland, because they were great traders. And of course, the inscription here was in Elamite. And when the Persians came into Iran, they had Elamites everywhere writing for them, because the Elamites could already write. And the Elamites said, we can write our language, you speak yours, we will write it also. So they wrote Persian in the beginning. You can even tell that the Old Persian is written by Elamite scribes because of the influence. So this is the capital, the ruins of the capital of the Elamites. This is Susa. You see this very large area with these ruins. And it was located, you can read here where it was located, at the alluvial base of the Karkesh and Karun rivers. And you saw on the map where it was located. And it is one of the oldest writing systems in the world, because we have Sumerian being written from 3200 BC and Elamite being written from 3100 BC. It's one of the oldest written literate civilizations on the planet, much older than, say, Chinese or anything you find in Latin America. So it's one of the oldest literary traditions. Elamite is a very big and important ancient civilization. They wrote first in one type of script called Elamite pictographic script, and later they adopted cuneiform, which was also being used throughout Mesopotamia, and then they wrote in cuneiform, and in the inscription you saw it in cuneiform. This is Elamite art. So you see Elamite art. Here you see the extent of Elam on the map, on the Persian Gulf, Sumer, Babylonia, and Elam. And you see it most with the Persians, Parthians, the Medes, these Iranian groups coming into what is now Iran. But the Elamites are here. This is their art. Here you see the Proto-Elamite pictographic script. So 3100 BC, the Elamites were already writing in this script. Here you see a tablet in the upper left-hand corner in the Proto-Elamite pictographic script, and then you see around examples of Elamite art, Elamite artifacts from the 3rd millennium and 2nd millennium BC. So very old, a very old civilization with very ancient artifacts, and a very advanced civilization in the global context at that point in time. These were the most advanced civilizations: Sumer, Elam, and Akkad, the most advanced civilizations in the antique world. Of course, we don't forget Egypt. But look at this, the Elamite trade network. Here is Elam proper, but we find Elamite inscriptions or pictographic tablets in Elamite all the way here in what later became Soviet Central Asia, and now it is just Central Asia, and here at Tepe Yahya and into Afghanistan. So we find Elamite, and of course even in the Kabul Museum you have tablets in Elamite, because they find Elamite all in Afghanistan. So the whole, and they traded with the Indus civilization. And here is this important link. They are contiguous before the Persians come. They are basically almost contiguous with the Indus civilization, and the Indus civilization is, when we look at ancient civilizations, the largest civilization amongst the ancient civilizations in terms of its surface area, the surface area of the core region. So the Indus civilization is extremely important, and we know that it stood in direct contact with the Elamites and their trade network and their script. This is after the Elamites, after the Persians had come. So these are the ruins of Persepolis. The ruins of Persepolis are remarkable because what remains are the stone structures. What is lost is all of the parts of the buildings that were made with wood, with timber. And where did the timber come from? Because if you fly over Iran or travel through Iran today, you wonder where could they have got the timber from. Iran was covered with forests. The palynological studies of Zeist and Botema in the 1990s established all of this forest, and the historians, Arnold Toynbee and others of the Persian Empire, had studied, of course, the use of timber, and this is all gone. This is humans doing this. Deforestation began a long time ago, and the British historian Arnold Toynbee is one of those who documented this history of deforestation. The Persians were big deforesters, so there was lots of timber used here, which is all gone. Where could the timber now come from? So you have the Persians, and you have the long history of the Persian Empire, and during this period the Elamites keep writing their own language, and they keep working for the Persians as the scribes, writing Persian. And as Persian becomes more purely Persian, the Elamite language, the later forms of the language, become influenced by Persian, but they're not related. Elamite is an unrelated, totally unrelated to Persian. Persian is an Indo-Germanic or Indian language, and Elamite is totally separate. So you have, I hope, had a chance to read the slides. So until Alexander the Great and the Yavanas, the Macedonians, came to the Indus Valley, this Achaemenid Elamite cuneiform was still in use. After that, it died out. This is again part of the Achaemenid period, so this is again Persian, not Elamite. This is 6th to 4th century BC. It's just the ruins of the Persians being established there, but even in this period we still find Elamites, because the Persians assimilated the Elamites and took over the Elamites, and the Elamites did this, were the literate stratum of society. So the latest form of Elamite before the language goes extinct is Achaemenid Elamite. Achaemenid is a dynasty of the Persians, and Elamite is a language which is basically not a Persian language, but a language that was spoken throughout Persia by the literate people who pre-inhabited the area before the Persians came. So the Elamites are very important. And this is to show you Proto-Elamite here, this tablet, and here you see Proto-Elamite, and here you see the Indus script. And you see that they're not only structurally similar, but if you look closely at the Elamite individual characters and make an inventory of characters of the Elamite script, an inventory of characters of the Indus script, then you see that there is material correspondence between the Indus script characters and the Proto-Elamite pictographic script, the individual characters. So there's actual correspondence. This is the extent of the Indus civilization. We already mentioned that this is the largest of the ancient civilizations of this period in terms of its sheer surface area. It's a great civilization, and of course it started to be in the 4th millennium BC and lasted until towards the latter part of the 2nd millennium BC. And the part of the phase of development that is called mature Harappan lasted from 2600 to 1900 BC. So it is this very large area which is Indus. You know, if two scripts are similar, it doesn't mean that the languages are related. Swahili is written in the same alphabet as English, but the language is not related, it's historical. But here these scripts are not the same, they're similar. We know that the two civilizations were in contact, but what language was spoken by the people of the Indus civilization? This is Bollywood imagining how people looked like at Mohenjo-Daro. This is just Bollywood imagination. But going back to science, Hermann Gottlieb Brunhofer in 1893, he looked at the textual evidence, and all of the old Indologists, they looked at the textual evidence in the Vedas and in other old Indic texts. So we have the 4 Vedas, the Puran, the Brahmanas, they study this, and they talk about this, the texts talk about this invasion. A gory battle is described in the Rig Veda, where the Aryans enter. Of course, we know that the Aryans describe themselves as Puram Dara, as those who destroy the Puras, the forts of the indigenous people. And so people, it starts, and that's very interesting, with the linguists and the philologists finding evidence in the texts, the Indian texts, for an invasion, a movement of Aryans into this Indus Valley. Marshall and Dairam Sahni, who then start the excavation at Harappa, that is only after they are told to be looking there by the linguists and the philologists. So the linguists and philologists study the text and say, this is where you should be looking. And indeed, lo and behold, this is where they then looked and found. So the archaeologists followed the trail, and of course, Mortimer Wheeler was able to follow up and do a lot of work afterwards. We have Binod Bihari Roy actually saying Harappa and Hariyupia, the Hariyupia mentioned in the Rig Veda, this must be the same place. This is the place where the Aryans came and invaded and destroyed the forts of the indigenous people and then assimilated them. This is the traditional theory in scholarship. So it is not that the Aryans came in and introduced writing. The Indus civilization was literate. They were writing, they have their own script. After the Aryans came, after the demise of the Indus civilization, there was no writing in the Indian subcontinent for 1,000 years. So writing was there, and then it vanished. And the vanishing of the literary tradition, plunging the subcontinent into a literary night, to use the words of Gordon Childe, that is coetaneous with the advent of the Aryans. So the Aryans were not seen by traditional scholarship as civilizers. They were seen as invaders. So here we have the actual script. The trouble with deciphering the script is that all of the corpus is in small bits. It's not in a large text. So it's very difficult for linguists to decipher, and the best work on deciphering the script was done by Asko Parpala after the work together with his close colleague, Irvatam Mahadevan, who did the exhaustive concordance of all Indus script symbols. And so if you want to read something very good on deciphering, and he modestly titles the books Deciphering the Indus Script, because It's not a definitive decipherment, but it is a probable decipherment, and the best fit for the Indus script, the best fit, and he's not the only one. I write about it in my book. There are Knozerov. I'd never met Knozerov, but I knew his daughter in Leningrad. He also worked on the decipherment in the Soviet Union and arrived at similar results. And Mahadevan also did and arrived at similar results. The best fit seems to be with Proto-Dravidian. The best, most plausible readings seem to be with Proto-Dravidian. So this is a book you can read. We pointed out that the Dravidian civilization started or originated in 3300 BC, but actually there was civilization there before. That's the Mehrgar Neolithic, and here you see it in the Hindu Kush, and this is it's what is called in archaeology a primary Neolithic. So it is an early Neolithic where before that you have these microlithic traditions. So you have the Neolithic arising, and this is the antecedent of the Indus civilization, the Mehrgar Neolithic, very well studied by Catherine Jarige and her husband. What's her husband's name? Francois or something, Jarige. Anyway, the couple, and then their whole team of archaeologists, both French and Pakistani and other nationalities, but they study the Mehrgar Neolithic. And here you see some of the now come the linguists, and the linguists look carefully, and this famous man, Igor Mikhailovich Dyakonov, I met him once, only just for a few moments. I was just a young student, in Leningrad, what is now St. Petersburg in the Soviet Union. I met him, and he was, an old guru, and so I had to say, just say namaste, or zdravstvuyte in Russian, and just introduce myself. But he wrote, in 1967, he wrote about Elamite, that Elamite was Dravidian. Of course, we saw that Caldwell already suspected this, but he said, if you look at Elamite carefully, and he was a very analytical linguist, he found correspondence. So you have the type of same suffixal agglutination in the verbal and nominal stems, a close similarity between the Dravidian case endings in proto-reconstructed Dravidian, Proto-Dravidian, and reconstructed by the comparative method, and Elamite nominal postpositions. They match for the pronouns. So when you have the pronouns, nanu, navu, ninu, nivu, and then you reconstruct a Proto-Dravidian, and then you compare this to Elamite, you see that these also correspond. And then the nomina actionis seems to have, in Elamite, seems to have cognates in modern Dravidian languages, and then the subjunctive suffix, the participle in Indian, these actual grammatical correspondence. This is what Dyakonov found in the Soviet Union. And then you had this man who came here, and apparently he learned to speak fluent Malayalam. I would love to do that, but anyway, Mikhail Sergeyevich Andronov, here is his name in Cyrillic, oh, here it is, Andronov. So he wrote Sravnitelная грамматика дравидийских языков in Moscow, or a comparative grammar of the Dravidian languages. I write about his work in my book in 2001, but since it had not yet been translated into English, I of course use the Russian version. But I'm using the map here from the from his English translation, which came after my book. But this is just a translation of the Russian map, actually. So in the Soviet Union, you don't have very many types of vegetables. You didn't have very many things to eat at all, really, I remember. But so he imagined a head of cabbage, kapusta, and he imagined this rolling south from the Indus and shedding leaves here and there, shedding leaves on the way to the south, and that he imagined that the Dravidian languages spread this way. The dates he gets from lexicostatistics, and many very conservative comparative linguists like myself, we don't believe in lexicostatistics, but it is good for something if you compare it with the comparative, if you combine it with the comparative method. But now people are getting into lexicostatistics again, but anyway, The dates, this is a very Russian thing, to date it based on lexicostatistics in the comparative method, but I'm not going to give a linguistics course here. In the comparative method, we date in a different way. Okay, but these are but we may arrive at similar dates. So this is why, and of course, the fact that Brahui is spoken here is very interesting. David McAlpin, he found a number of shared traits and wrote this, Proto-Elamo-Dravidian, the evidence and its implications. And then later we have Sanford Berenger Stevenson writing analysis to synthesis. It's very important when you reconstruct a language, you don't compare modern Kannada with Elamite. You compare Kannada with its closest relatives, you compare Northern Dravidian with reconstructed Southern Dravidian, then you go to Proto-Dravidian in a systematic fashion. And that Proto-Dravidian, reconstructed Proto-Dravidian is what you compare with Elamite. So that's the way the comparison is conducted. But of course, many conservative linguists said, oh no, this is going out on a limb, we don't believe, there's not enough evidence, or so, people were reluctant. So this is the Elamo-Dravidian language family, according to David Wayne McAlpin in 1981. Here you have Zagrotian. Zagrotian is again named after those Zagros mountains that you saw in western Iran. And here you have Proto-Elamite with a question mark. So even McAlpin, he left it with question mark. But here you have Proto-Brahui in Pakistan, which is where the Indus civilization was located. And then you have the rest of Proto-Dravidian, north, mainstream. And in the second talk, we'll talk about how you get these branches, how you know these branches are like this. So this is McAlpin's family tree of Dravidian, but it includes, you see, Elamite and Brahui. And it also reads almost nicely from west to east. Also from north to south. So from northwest to southeast, you can read it, the language family tree. And again, that matches Andronov's cabbage rolling to the south. This is Krishnamurti and his book on the Dravidian languages, and he wrote many comparative historical studies on Dravidian, and he was a great linguist, a really truly great linguist. But he was amongst those people who was very reluctant to accept the Elamo-Dravidian hypothesis. He was very reluctant, and this actually colored his perceptions. When you read his work, it is beautiful work, but his observations sometimes seem to support even Elamo-Dravidian, but he presents it differently or presents it modestly, but he states the facts. He's a very good scholar. He states the facts, but he is reluctant to accept this hypothesis. So when you see also his family tree, notice that he puts the northwesternmost languages on this side, and then he puts Tamil on this side. So he reverses even the shape of the language family tree to draw attention away from the Elamo-Dravidian hypothesis, because he was actually reluctant. Later in life, he became less opposed, but in the beginning, he was quite opposed to the hypothesis. So later that changed, but and his formulations become more nuanced, more balanced, more tentative. But he presents all the facts. He is a real scholar. And he is a formidable and great scholar, but he is no longer here, sadly. He passed away 10 years ago. This is Brahui. This is very amazing because this area is Balochistan, and the language spoken here is Baluch. And this whole area is inhabited by Baluch, and the Brahui and the Baluch live together, like Tulu and Kannadiga living together in one place. So you see two languages being used together, but you see that there is a hierarchical relationship between the groups. The Brahui are looked down upon is a strong way of putting it, but the Baluch consider themselves higher than the Brahui. But the Brahui may be then the indigenous people of this area, and there's a lot to read about this commensal relationship, this close relationship between the Brahui and the Baluch in this area. And the best book, it's 3 books, was written by this man, written in 1909. I read it in the British Library because we usually have every book in Leiden, in the Netherlands, where I was at the time. But we did not have this. I had to fly to London to read it. Nowadays, students want everything given to them by the professor as a PDF file. We had to fly to another country to go read a book, or to read these 3 books. So it's about Brahui, and it's an etymological dictionary of Brahui, but it's also about the relationship between the Brahui and Baluch. It's a real sociological study, very intensive, definitely worth reading, definitely worth flying to London for. This is the great scholar, Professor D.N.S. Bhatt, and he wrote this study on the Korga language. Why is Korga so important? Korga is one of the languages that is very important because there are items, there are grammatical features in Korga which make us think Korga looks special in that family tree, may have a special place in that family tree. And then I think of my good friend in Bhutan, who is Karan, who is a Kurukh speaker, and he's very interested also in what could be the position of Korga, because Kurukh, he is a northern Dravidian, and he is very interested in this. This is Professor Dr. Kamal Zwelebil. He died, but he was a professor at my university, my alma mater, the University of Leiden in the Netherlands. He was from Bohemia. This is the Czech lion, the Bohemian lion, and he fled from the communists. He fled to the free West, and then he joined our university here, or my previous university. And he wrote this book, which was published in Pondicherry, and he worked, and he loved Dravidian. He also worked on Ilamo Dravidian, and he also made an inventory in this book of other hypotheses which exist. There's a Japanese man who believes that Dravidian is related to Japanese. He's not taken very seriously, but he even writes about that theory and treats it with respect. All of the theories that have been advanced, he looks at in a fair and objective way. So he was a great scholar. I remember, because he was a refugee from the Czech Republic, or from Czechoslovakia at the time, we spoke Czech together, but he learned Dutch. And then he settled in France after he retired, and now he's gone. He is dead. But he was a professor of Dravidology. The title of his chair at our university was Professor of Dravidian Languages and Linguistics. So he had an actual chair in the West dedicated to Dravidian linguistics, and he was not the only one. And I was just speaking to our colleague from the sociology department. Now many young people are looking for technology, cryptocurrency, finance, computer, IT, artificial intelligence. That's all very good. Maybe you get a job. But what about Gyan? What about Sabhyata? What about civilization and knowledge and the humanities? Still very important. Extremely important, especially when you have languages like Kannada, with a literary tradition and an epigraphic tradition much older than English and much richer than English. Has to be studied. It is so important to understanding not only Indian civilization, but understanding Manav Sabhyata, the civilization of mankind. It's important, I think. And this man, he was at the University of Yale and at the University of California in Santa Barbara, in Berkeley. But he is Canadian, or he was born in Nova Scotia in Canada, and he wrote a Dravidian etymological dictionary, and he devoted his life to Dravidian. And when he was 100 years old, they invited him to the Dravidian language conference and said, we want to do this in your honor. But he was 100 years old, and he said, no, I think I'm going to go for a drive and go on a vacation with my wife so instead. Maybe I'll come next year. Of course, he lived to be 101, but so Dravidian is also good for your longevity. You should study Dravidian languages and live a long life. But he worked on Dravidian. He also had a chair devoted to Dravidian languages. I don't know any chairs in the West now devoted to Dravidian linguistics and languages exclusively, Dravidology, but I think they should exist. I think this is extremely important. So Bhatt and McAlpin, they grouped Koraga together with Kuruch and Malta under Northern Dravidian. Both Bhatt did this, who is of course a real Dravidian scholar and a Dravidian speaker, and then Zvenebil proposed Koraga, maybe we should treat it separately in a separate branch, just like Brahui. So treating it something very separate. Now even Krishnamurti, he thought that this was a problem. He thought that the position of Koraga in the language family was a problem, and it also had to do with the position of Tulu, because Tulu has been influenced by Kannada for centuries. And if we look at the grammar of Tulu with the eye of a comparative linguist, we see what is Kannada influence and what is original Tulu. And this separation is what historical linguists of the caliber of the great scholar Bhadiraju Krishnamurti were looking at, and then they see first it looks like an offshoot of Tulu at the recent past, but actually he said this is what it looks like prima facie at first glance. But when you look deeper, then you begin to doubt this subgrouping scheme, and this has to be appropriately located. So even this, which was a criticism of his reluctance to accept Alamo-Dravidian, later he was saying yes, Tulu has to be looked at in a new light, and Koraga has to be looked at in a new light by the techniques of comparative linguistics, which we'll talk about in the second talk. And even this form, the past tense suffix, this also is another Northern Dravidian trait which makes us think that maybe Tulu, which is so influenced by Kannada over the centuries, and Koraga there may be perhaps also Northern Dravidian. It opens many questions about population prehistory. This is a book that I wrote in 2001. It's in 2 volumes, 1,475 pages is what they tell me. So it also treats, although it's about the languages of the Himalayas, since we have Dravidian speakers even in Bhutan and Nepal, in very small numbers, but they are still speakers of Dravidian languages, in the Tarai, and in the case of Karan in Thimphu itself, the Dravidian is discussed, and the history of Dravidian is discussed in this book. It's not only really about the Himalayas, it's about the whole Indian subcontinent. Future linguistic research and genetic studies are going to solve this question along with linguistic research. So the answers to these questions are going to be uncovered, and I think that Mangalore is going to be the center of helping to solve the problems, because it's going to be very important not only for our understanding of the Dravidian language family and of the position of Koraga and Tulu, but also the whole population prehistory of the Indian subcontinent. So that's the end of the first session. Thank you for listening.
If any queries, kindly raise your hand.
Sir, thank you very much for a wonderful talk on an interesting topic. My question is that you mentioned about all the Dravidian languages, including Tamil, Kannada, etc. What about Sanskrit? It is said that, there's a saying that Sanskrit is a basis for many languages, something like that. How scientifically justified it is?
Yes, this is a very good question, and this is also what confused the first Portuguese, and later, the Portuguese were here, then the Dutch came, only after the British, and the Portuguese and the Dutch they wrote about this, but they were confused because there was so much Sanskrit in Malayalam and in Kannada, so much Sanskrit, but we have to distinguish in historical comparative linguistics between the borrowed component of the language and the inherited component of the language. We can ask our colleague here from the English department, only 25% to 26%, depending on who is doing the counting, of the words in English are Germanic, of Germanic pedigree. But English is phylogenetically a Germanic language. But most of its vocabulary is borrowed from French, Greek, Latin after the Norman invasion of 1066. So there's lots of Sanskrit in Kannada and in other Dravidian languages more or less. But Sanskrit belongs to another language family, and that is the topic of the next talk after tea. That's the topic. So it's a genetically unrelated language family, but culturally it's very important. Just like Latin is a Romance language, English is a Germanic language, but English is suffused with Latin words. We talk about, we go to see the Dupe waterfalls, and on the way we worry about drinking enough water, and we talk about hydrating ourselves, rehydrating. These are words that are not English, but they are English. But they're all, Greek and Latin. In the same way, the Dravidian languages took lots of Sanskrit. But they're two separate language families. If we look at the root, the root words, then they are Dravidian. And if we look at all of the borrowed words, they are Sanskrit. And not only do the Dravidian languages borrow from Sanskrit, languages that are Indo-Aryan and derive from Sanskrit directly, they also borrow from Sanskrit. That's why in linguistics you have the term tatsama and tadbhava. Tatsama is a word, like in Nepali, you will take the word from Sanskrit, you have the word aushadhi. It changes by natural sound change and it becomes okati in Nepali. But now the word okati is used in Nepali only for some herbal medicine that your grandmother makes in an okli, stamps with jari booty from the forest and makes. That is what you use. But if you go to the Ganesh Medical here in Mangalore and you buy colored capsules, colored looking capsules, then they will say aushadhi, and then they take the tatsama word. So there are two words, they're the same word, but even Indo-Aryan words are borrowing from Sanskrit. So then you have the tadbhava and the tatsama. But in Dravidian languages you have real Dravidian vocabulary, which is then related to Elamite, it seems, but not related to Sanskrit, even though you have lots of borrowings from Sanskrit. Yeah.
One more question, others are there. Many questions are there. You have mentioned that Tamil is the oldest Dravidian language or Indian language, but as per a recent research, Kannada is older than Tamil, something like that. I have read in newspaper. What is your opinion?
Well,
thank you.
I wouldn't necessarily trust a newspaper. I hope that there's no journalist here. I don't want to insult your profession. But I mean, you have to look at the comparative linguistic, and also as biologists, you can think about this. Because if you look at modern forms, you can look at modern forms and say, the Australopithecus and the bonobo, their skeletons are actually very difficult to distinguish from each other, if you're not familiar. They're very close. But a bonobo is still not an Australopithecus, but probably descended from the Australopithecus just as we do. So you have Kannada as it is spoken now, Kannada as it was written in by Nripatunga, and then you have the reconstructed South Dravidian. It goes through time. So Tamil as it is spoken now, the colloquial Tamil, and the written literary standard, which is codified in the 4th century AD, 14th century AD, is already different. So then you go back and you get to the oldest Tamil. As you go back, it converges and everything becomes, so the oldest is Proto-Dravidian, but that is no longer spoken. So the modern languages are all descendant. Like if we look at the Germanic languages, also you can say, which is older? Is English older, or is that language older, or is that language older because it has an older literary tradition? You can say, well, German retained this, Icelandic retained this, but English, which didn't retain very much, at least the consonants, are older pronunciation than in German. So the consonants in English, the plosives in initial position, are like those of Dutch, and they're the older pronunciation, whereas the second Germanic sound shift in German has made that less, but the German retains other old things. So you see retentions, but I'd love to give a course in historical linguistics, but it takes a semester. But these are the topics that you are raising. They're very central, and that's why your question is so important also. It's a very good question.
One more question.
Yes, please.
According to the migrations, and already the scientists shown that the migration, the Dravidian languages, what Tamil and is there, no, we have closely related to the African population as per scientific proof. So as what your tree is showing from that something it is different. Whether which one has to consider language basis or phylogenetic basis, we have to be considered.
Yes,
The relationship as concerned.
I love the question because this is a very good question, and it actually broaches a very important topic, which we will talk about in the second and third talk a little bit. The thing about the past is that it took such a long time. We are all African, we all came from Africa, but I think none of us can remember that. It was 2 lakh years ago that our ancestors came from Africa, but so much happened since then. So if we look at the whole language family tree, we'll look at the whole phylogenetic tree of humankind based on the Y chromosome haplogroup. We'll look at that next lecture or the lecture after, just briefly. But that took a long time ago. What we are talking about with these linguistic expansions is the linguistically reconstructible past, which is much more recent. We can only see as far back as the beginning of the Holocene with comparative linguistics, whereas with genetics, we can go back to the Pleistocene, to the Quaternary, and further back. So it's about the time depth. Otherwise, you'll get anachronisms. You'll get anachronisms like people saying, Buddha was born in Nepal. Well, yes, he was born in Lumbini, but he was not born in the Federal Democratic Republic of Nepal because that did not yet exist. He was born in Lumbini and lived in Kapilavastu. Those places existed. So we have to be, and especially the students, that's why I think the professor asked this very important question, to guard ourselves against anachronisms, we have to keep things that happened, that were separated not only in time, not only in space, but also in time. So temporally separated events, the spread of Dravidian, it spread from some place, but it's much more ancient is our ancestry in Africa. That's 2 lakh years ago, when anatomically modern humans started emerging from Africa in waves. So and then all of the things that happened since then, and since the last glacial maximum. That's only since the last glacial maximum is what linguists dare to reconstruct, because language changes so much.